Over here I have the data from the pulse rate activity, and in this video I'd like to show you how to do some data processing and how to make bar graphs. The first thing that you have to do is you have to make the table a little bit better, because there's some important information missing. For example, what do these numbers indicate? Well, these are is the pulse rate in beats per minute, but it says nowhere. So we have to add a little bit of information, data here. And over here you also see that over here this one is empty, and that's fine. And I'm going to show you how to deal with this issue here of not having any data here. As a matter of fact, you just leave it empty. So I need to add a few lines here at the very top. How do I do that? I click mark the whole line, right click, and click insert. Then I mark these 4 cells here because I would like to have a title stretching all across these 4 cells, and I click merge and center. Again, this is the English version. You have to find the German translations, I think, verbinden und zentrieren, if I remember correctly. So I merge and center it. And now I can type a meaningful title, and I type type of activity. Type of activity. But the problem here is I still do not have the units, okay? So it's not a very meaningful title. So I changed the title around, I realized it's not a good title, and I would like to indicate the following. What does the table show? It shows you the pulse rate in beats per minute of different activities. And this is actually a much more meaningful title and a little bit more useful in my view. Well, you know what? Alt enter, and then we make it a little bit wider here. Maybe this is also a possibility, okay? Because then I can make the table a little bit more narrow. Okay? I don't know. Maybe it's too narrow. Okay, it doesn't matter. I see I already made a little table and graph over here, so I'm going to erase this. So, you can make the whole thing look nice now by including a few lines. It makes it a little bit more organized, but that's cosmetics, which you might also want to do at the very end. So this is your raw data, and what you have to do is you have to process this data, and you do the following. You want to calculate the average. So you go down here, you write down average. And over here you have to type a function. In German it's called Mittelwert, in English it's called average. Equals average. Open the parentheses. Then you mark the cells of which you would like to calculate the average of. Close parentheses. You can actually follow it along at the top as well. And you press enter. So the average is 69. If you see something like this, if you see an answer like this, then this is a sign that you didn't quite adjust the decimal places properly, because you cannot have more decimal places down here than in your original data. So if you get a number like this, you have to reduce the decimal places, okay? So the next thing, of course you could do the same thing over here and over here and over here, but there's an easier way. You mark the cell, you go to the corner here until it changes, the cursor changes to a plus, you click it and you drag it over. And you have the nice values as well across. You would like to probably also make it bold. And now, every time when you calculate an average, you have to calculate a standard deviation for each one of these. I think in the previous video I forgot to tell you the German translation is called Standardabweichung, Stab V. Stab V is the German translation of the function. Standard deviation. Again, a problem over here because it is a little bit too large. Alt enter. Okay, and over here stdev is the English name of the function, standard deviation. Open parenthesis, and then you mark again the values. You do not mark the average cell, okay? You're only concerned about your raw data. And close parenthesis, enter. again over here, if you get a value that looks like that, you have to reduce the number of decimal places. And what do you do next? You go over here and you drag it over. And if you do not like if you don't like it that the numbers are at the bottom, you can move them into the center by clicking middle align. So you now have process data. You have the averages and you have the standard deviations. Now what about those empty cells over here? Well, don't worry, the computer ignores them when calculating the average and standard deviations. So do not type in 0, because if you type in 0, look what happens to these values down here. If you type in 0, it would it changes. It would indicate a pulse rate of 0. Well, that's not what you did. You simply did not. You don't have a measurement here because, I don't know, the person made a mistake measuring the pulse rate, or you made a mistake writing it down, or you simply didn't measure it because you didn't have time. You just document the reason later on why you don't have a measurement, but you do not simply fill in 0 because 0 is a real number. And a pulse rate of 0 means that you measured 0. Well, if you did measure 0, well, then that's what you write down, but I mean, come on. Yeah. Here it was clear that there was an error in the method. So these values are now fine, and now I'm going to show you how to make a graph using these values. You do not make a graph of your raw data. You only graph the processed data, the calculated data. And the first question that you have to ask yourself is, which type of graph are you going to use? Are you going to use a line graph or a bar graph? What do you want to do? Sitting, standing, walking, and stairs, these are all categories, and therefore you must use a bar graph. So how does this work? You mark the title here, sitting, standing, walking, stairs, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that I don't have to scroll up and down all the time. And then you also have to mark the average. But if you now mark the average, and you're going to see that you lose the marking the selection of the titles here. So you have to mark this. You have to press and hold the control key, the Steuerung Taste, STRG in German. You press it and hold it, and then you can mark this one over here as well. And then you let go. You must make sure that don't mark like this. You know, some people do this. This is not good because you're marking too much over here and the size is not the same. Really, please, you gotta be careful. Okay, you mark it. Okay, this one is also marked. It's simply not colored in. Okay, it's also marked. And then you can insert a graph. And over here you wanna insert a bar graph, a column graph. You can choose one. Please do not choose fancy 3D graphs because they are difficult to read. You choose this one over here, and I now move this over here, and you can see that over here I have the titles because I marked them, and have the values over here, and series 1 tells me absolutely nothing. So what do I do with that? I simply erase it because it's meaningless. Now I'm still not finished because I'm missing a title and I'm missing axis labels and units. So how do you do that? You have to go to You click, of course, you have to click into the graph first, then you click layout, and over here you can insert a chart title, you can insert an axis title. Now click here. Primary horizontal axis title is title below the axis. How do I want to call this? Type of activity. Okay. And of course you also would like to include a vertical axis, and now I have several options. Default axis, order and labels, axis in thousands and millions, axis with long scale. Okay, but these are not the things that I'm concerned about. This is basically simply the numbers. What you're really interested in is you're interested in the axis titles over here. Vertical axis title, and here you have a choice, either a rotated one or a vertical one or a horizontal title. I think horizontal one takes too much space away, so I'm going to do a rotated one. And I now indicate the following. This is the average pulse rate. And what am I missing in beats per minute? I have to include the units as well. No. Okay. That's basically the thing. And chart title should also be included. And what I'm going to do, of course I do not repeat the average pulse rate, but a comparison of pulse rate. Okay, that would be a possibility. And now I have a more or less meaningful graph, but one of the things that is still missing is the standard deviation is not included in here yet. And so the error bars are missing, and I have to do that as well. That's really important, otherwise you will not get full points. So if you want to include these error bars, you have to first click once into the bars, and you see that all of them are now marked. And over here it says error bars. In German I think it's called Fehlerindikatoren, and you find it in the layout tab. And now it will now ask you, do you have none, or standard error, percentage, or standard deviation. Excuse me. Which one are you going to use? Now, if you want to use standard deviation over here, because I have standard deviations over here calculated, well then it's unfortunately wrong. Because if you choose this standard deviation, it will do something different. It will calculate a new standard deviation, and that's not what we want. We have already calculated the standard deviation, and this one will do something else. Okay, so don't use this one. You have to use more error bar options. You will get a new box, and it will actually also ask you down here for standard deviations. No, please don't do that, because if you choose that, you will have the same standard deviation for all of them. Look, if I click this over here, standard deviation, okay, then you will see it's the same one for all of them, but that's not right. I do not want that. You have to use a custom one, and you have to specify the value. So I'm going to move it over again a little bit, because I need to be able to read the standard deviations. So you use a custom one, you specify the value, you'll now get a new window over here, and now you do the following. You erase this one over here, and for the positive error value, you now mark the standard deviation. You will fill it in with table. And for the negative error value, you also erase this, backspace, and you also use the same standard deviation. So you have, in both cases, you have everything the same, and because you marked it here, it will now use for each bar, it will use its own correct standard deviation. If you use the one over here, then it will basically make the standard deviation the same for all of them, which is not correct. Then you click OK, and you see something happened. Over here I close it, and now you can see, maybe not very well, but almost, that this one is a little bit shorter than, for example, this one over here, and that's correct, because 10 is of course not as much than 14. So each bar now has its own correct standard deviation linked to it. So what does this mean, standard deviation? It means that about 68% of the values, which is about 2/3 of the values, go from here to here. So it's like a gray zone, so to say. So, okay, the error bars are like a gray zone. And if you compare, for example, standing and walking, over here you might be inclined of saying, well, walking has 85 beats per minute and standing 84. So if you walk, you have a higher pulse rate than if you stand, because 5 is more than 84. But if you actually see, the uncertainty is so big in both cases that in reality you do not see a difference. Standing and walking result in the same pulse rate. And that's something some students have a problem understanding, that 84 and 85 is actually so close together that there is no difference, because the uncertainty and the errors are too large. The errors, the mistakes, are larger than the differences in values. And for this reason, between standing and walking there is no significant difference. For example, sitting and stairs, there is a slightly significant difference, because the positive standard deviation up here stops where the lower standard deviation starts. So there is not a big overlap between sitting and stairs, walking stairs. So this means that there is a difference between sitting and stairs, but there is no big difference between standing and walking, and there's also not a big difference between walking and standing and stairs, because there is a big overlap. So that's the importance, so to say, of standard deviations, because it actually tells you something about the quality of your average. So what do you do next? The next thing that you would do is you would adjust the size a little bit of the graph. You can make it look nice, and then you mark the graph and you mark the tables and you copy paste them over into Word, and these are then your basically, this will then make your protocol. So you still save the Excel table, of course, but you will also copy paste it over, and if you discover that you made a mistake, you go back to this Excel table, you make the changes, you do the calculations and the graph, and then you copy paste it back again into Word. So that's basically a quick introduction of making graphs using bar graphs, and in a different video I'm going to show you how to make line graphs. So what do I have to do now? Of course, you always save your work. Okay, so that's it.